It was hot outside the National Archives, so I thought maybe I'd just been hallucinating, but then I heard it again when we were finally inside and past the security guards, and it started to bother me. I couldn't quite place my finger on what it was that I was hearing, but when I was standing in the long line outside of the dimly lit rotunda that housed our nation's founding documents, I finally understood what it was. It was the sound of ignorance. And it was coming from the people all around me. I heard a grandmother tell their grandson that they were about to see the thing that they wrote on July the 4th, the Constitution or something. I listened to a high school student tell someone over the phone that he was about to see the Constitution of Independence, man! And when the guard instructed us that the Declaration of Independence was next to the Constitution, so form two straight lines and work your way out, I heard multiple children asking their parents what the difference between the two even was. True, perhaps some children hadn't been taught U.S. history yet in the wildly inefficient, money-sucking, yet ever-growing public school system, and perhaps that granny was just really old. But still, it bothered me. It bothered me that a high school student, a senior, by the looks of him, was not aware that the Constitution of Independence, well, doesn't exist. I learned that day that there is a plague all across this nation, an intellectual plague. While people may not be necessarily getting dumber, they are learning less and less, at least of the important issues. Now, the Constitution, true, is technically just a piece of paper, and true fallible men were the framers of this document. And it is certainly not the only Constitution that has ever been written. But we know that the Constitution means much more than another piece of paper could ever mean. And true, it was written by fallible men, and they weren't extraordinary men either. James Madison had stage fright. George Washington's teeth started falling out at age 24. And Ben Franklin wanted to be a swim coach. Not demigods, not infallible. They were fallible men, but informed men. And that is key. Now, the reason I told you that story earlier, and the reason I over-dramatized today's lack of historical education, was to let you see, along with me, what the Founding Fathers would see if they were here today, and if they had been in line with me to see the documents that they helped create almost 225 years ago. And that is the important aspect to be considered. What would these informed men think? It's probably clear what I think, and I assume that you at least sympathize with me in my fight against ignorance, and perhaps even agree with me. But what would they think? Now, I realize I just asked a very broad question, with many answers. Richard Stengel of Time magazine writes that people on the right and left constantly ask what the framers would say about some event that is happening today. What would the framers say about whether the drones over Libya constitute a violation of Article 1, Section 8, which gives Congress the power to declare war? Well, since George Washington didn't even dream that a man could fly, much less use a global positioning satellite to aim a missile, it's really hard to say what he would think. What would the framers say about whether a tax on people who did not buy health care is an abuse of Congress's authority under the Commerce Clause? Well, once again, since James Madison did not know what health insurance was, and doctors back then still used leeches, it's difficult to know what he would say. And what would Thomas Jefferson, a man who owned slaves and is believed to have fathered children with at least one of them, think about a half-white, half-black American president born in Hawaii, a state that did not exist? Again, hard to say. They were not gods, and were not infallible. Yes, they gave us, and the world, a blueprint for the protection of democratic freedoms, freedom of speech, assembly, religion. But they also gave us the idea that a black person was 3/5 of a human being, that women were not allowed to vote, and that South Dakota should have the same number of senators as California, which is kind of crazy. The truth is, They were just as diverse as our political figures today. The only thing that binds them together is the Constitution, and the only way they were able to create it was through their education. Their knowledge of Locke, Hobbes, Rousseau, the Roman Republic, and the Athenian democracy helped them to forge many aspects of our government that are present today. Their logical reasoning helped them to foresee problems that would come up in the future regarding freedoms and liberties. So what would they think? First, I'll talk about how they would react to their government's system historical outcome. Then I'll discuss their reactions to how the Constitution has influenced our country politically. And finally, I'll discuss what they would think about our view of the Constitution. Well, first, they wouldn't be surprised, not all of them anyways, at the history of America. Benjamin Franklin, as informed as he was, said that the Constitution is likely to be well administered for a course of years and can only end in despotism, as other forms have done before it, when the people shall become so corrupted as to need despotic government, being incapable of any other. In fact, when exiting that small state house in Philadelphia, he was asked what kind of government they had created. His response was, "A republic, if you can keep it." Franklin would perhaps be shocked, or hopefully pleasantly surprised, that over 200 years later, the government still runs on the basic principles of checks and balances, popular sovereignty, and was not totally despotic. The Anti-Federalists, however, the individuals who pushed for a formal Bill of Rights, would not be surprised. The only reason they pushed for one in the first place was to ensure that the government would not infringe on the understood and implied rights other founding fathers just assumed would be protected. I mean, do we really need an actual document to protect our speech, religion, press? I think that George Mason and many other anti-federalists would look at the pieces of legislation and the many Supreme Court cases from the past and simply smile in a sad, "I told you so" sort of way. Thomas Jefferson, who feared that government intervention in the economy and the states would only snowball into bigger government and less freedom, would certainly not be shocked in looking at our political landscape today. And George Washington, who warned against political parties, would certainly not be surprised to see the detrimental and negative effect that the system of the donkey and elephant has caused today. So, their first impression on our history would not be shock, surprise, or really astonishment. They know the important concept that nothing new is under the sun. Of course, they would all react differently to certain amendments to the Constitution. Some would be outraged that the South had been stripped of its right to slavery in the late 1880s, while some would only wonder why it actually took over 100 years for the debate over slavery and states' rights to escalate to war. Most of them would be surprised that women and 18-year-olds could vote, and that at one time alcohol was prohibited, that abortion has been legalized nationally, and that gay marriage was legalized in New York. So all in all, would the Founding Fathers be surprised at the results over the years? Probably not, at least to the core issues like liberty and governmental growth. Perhaps to the more cultural-based issues like gay marriage and abortion. How would they react, though? After all, these were men of action. They gathered at that small courthouse in Philadelphia to fix a government, and ended up creating a new one. These were the men that acted even earlier in the 1760s and 70s against the oppression of the British government. Surely, we cannot think for a moment that if the Founding Fathers were here today, they would kick back, eat potato chips, and watch Fox News. True, if they were actually here, they would have a lot to get used to. Seth Meyers, an accomplished comedy writer, put it interestingly when he commented that he, for one, thinks that if the Founding Fathers were here today, they'd be super freaked out about cars. You could talk to them all you want about the Second Amendment, and they would just yell, "What are all those metal beasts doing rolling down the thoroughfare?" In all seriousness, though, regardless of their probable awe of our technological accomplishments, they would want to get politically involved. So what would they think of the system that they had created? Jefferson would probably join the crowd of Bachman, Palin, and the Tea Party, and Adams and Hamilton would probably side with most moderates or perhaps even left-wing politicians. Hamilton's National Bank would fit in nicely with Obama's socialized health care and quasi-ownership of General Motors, while Jefferson's staunch states' rights activism would mesh perfectly with the same activism held by the Tea Party and many conservatives. True, not all of them would fit in, as John Jay would probably be displeased with the Supreme Court's judicial activism, but the interesting point I would like to make is that they would probably not make that much of a difference. While they are more educated than most politicians today, they are similar ideologically. And in the system that they have set up, they would be able to make a difference just as much as Jim DeMint, Rand Paul, Chuck Schumer, or Joseph Lieberman would be able to make. Some of them certainly would be pleased with this. Jefferson and Mason would surely be happy with less government control and more checks and balances, and Jefferson would certainly be happy with the grassroots movement, for it epitomizes his idea of government of the people. John Adams and Alexander Hamilton would probably be slightly frustrated, for their concepts of big government and paternalism would lead them to want to have more individual free control and less checks and balances. Once again, the fact that they are all fallible men is important, because that also means that they have differing opinions. While some would be happy with how their Democratic Republic turned out, others would be severely unhappy with the political results. Some of them would be frustrated for the government paternalism results. However, more important than their reactions to how America's history has played out, or how their government turned out, is the public opinion of the Constitution, which ties back into the story I told you about at the beginning. What would the Founding Fathers think of, well, what we think of the Constitution? Would they be shocked to hear a kid reference it as the Constitution of Independence? Would they be offended by children asking their parents to describe the differences between the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence Day? I think so. I think that while they might be divided in their political views and their social views and even possibly their moral views, they would be united in the idea that ignorance of the Constitution is inexcusable. For above all other differences, they saw the value in an educated people. They themselves were educated. It was their education that allowed them to create this totally different type of government in the first place. It was their culture's educated state that allowed that government to get going, no matter how faulty a start it may have been. The education of the nation allowed it to thrive and become a superpower. And the lack of education in the nation caused it to spiral down into a pool of political apathy, historical ignorance, and general confusion. They would be disappointed with the so-called history teachers of today who teach politically correct history instead of historically correct history. They would be disappointed with the politicians who have the audacity to stand in front of town halls and say, sure, the Constitution is very important, but... And perhaps Ben Franklin would be even more sure that only despotism would follow suit to the political apathy of today. I've asked multiple times during this speech what the Founding Fathers would think today. But a question should always have a reason for being asked. Why do we care what they think today? After all, they weren't demigods. Why should we care what a wannabe swim coach or a toothless war hero thinks about us today in the 21st century? The answer lies in the question. They weren't demigods. That's exactly it. They were normal people, and at the heart of every decision they made was an educated, patriotic yearning to make a difference, and a difference for the better. And on that thought, that underlying desire behind all of their bickering and arguing and compromising in that small, hot, humid Philadelphia courthouse, that thought was what made them great. And that thought would stay with them no matter what century they came to. And that thought is what they would want to impart on us. On the confused high school senior on the phone. On the old granny with her grandson. To every single one of us in this great nation. That with education and a passion to do good and a longing for the preservation of liberty, you can make a difference. Just like the Founding Fathers on September 17th, 1789.